The scream tore through the canyon before Tessa Vaughn even realized she was falling. Her mare's panicked whinny mixing with the sound of hooves scrambling against crumbling rock as the ground simply disappeared beneath them. One moment she had been riding along the ridge trail outside Douglas, Arizona, admiring how the September sun of 1884 painted the distant mountains gold, and the next she was tumbling THROUGH Chinese letter IR, her horse toppling sideways as the narrow path gave way. Tessa hit the steep ravine wall hard, her shoulder slamming against jutting stone as she rolled and slid downward in a chaos of dust and pain. She tried to grab at anything, sagebrush tearing through her gloves, rocks gouging her arms, until finally she crashed into a narrow ledge about 30 feet down, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs in a violent rush. For several seconds, maybe longer, Tessa could only lie there gasping like a landed fish, her chest refusing to draw air no matter how desperately her body demanded it. Above her, she heard her mare scrambling back to safety. Thank God, the sound of hooves on solid ground eventually fading. When oxygen finally flooded back into her lungs, it came with a wave of pain so intense that tears sprang to her eyes. Everything hurt. Her left ankle screamed with a hot, nauseating agony that suggested something very wrong. Her ribs ached with each breath. Blood seeped from dozens of cuts and scrapes across her arms and face. She tried to move and immediately regretted it. The ledge beneath her was barely 4 feet wide, covered in loose scree that shifted dangerously at her slightest movement. Beyond the edge, the ravine continued down another 50 feet to a boulder-strewn bottom where barrel cactus and mesquite grew in twisted defiance of the harsh terrain. Tessa pressed herself flat against the rock wall behind her, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She was trapped. The walls above were too steep to climb, especially with her ankle in this condition, and any attempt to move risked sending her sliding over the edge to certain death. Help! She called out, but her voice came out thin and weak, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the Arizona desert. Someone help me! Nobody answered. Of course nobody answered. She had ridden out alone despite her brother's warnings, needing solitude after another argument about her future. At 22, Tessa was tired of being told she needed to marry, settle down, stop having opinions about the family ranch. She had wanted space to think, to breathe, to feel something other than suffocated. Now she might die out here because of her own stubborn pride. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Tessa realized with growing horror that she had lost her canteen in the fall. Her hat was gone too, leaving her face exposed to the brutal afternoon heat. She tried calling for help again, louder this time, but the effort made her ribs scream and her vision swim with dark spots. How long would it take before someone came looking for her? Hours. The ranch hands knew she had ridden out, but they would not expect her back until evening. By then, in this heat, without water. She forced the thought away and focused on breathing slowly, carefully, trying not to panic. Her ankle throbbed with each heartbeat, already swelling inside her boot. She could feel blood trickling down her temple from a gash somewhere in her hairline. At least nothing felt broken except possibly her ankle. Small mercies. She closed her eyes and prayed, something she had not done with real sincerity in years, but desperation had a way of making believers of everyone. Time crawled past with agonizing slowness. The sun continued its arc across the sky, the angle of light shifting as shadows grew longer. Tessa drifted in and out of awareness, pain and thirst blurring the boundaries between consciousness and something darker. She dreamed of water, cool and clear. She dreamed of her childhood, running through the ranch house while her mother called after her to slow down, Be careful. Act like a lady. She dreamed of her father's funeral 2 years ago, how the weight of his expectations had not died with him but had instead transferred to her brother like an inherited burden. A sound pulled her back to full awareness. Hoofbeats. Real ones, not dream sounds. Tessa's eyes flew open and she tried to push herself up, sending a cascade of loose rocks skittering over the ledge's edge. "Help!" she screamed, putting every ounce of strength she had left into the word. "I am down here. Help me!" The hoofbeats stopped. For a terrible moment she thought she had imagined them, or that whoever it was had not heard her and was riding away. Then a man's voice called out, deep and carrying. "Where are you? Call out again." "Here. In the ravine I fell." Tessa shouted back, tears of relief streaming down her dust-caked face. "Please, I am trapped on a ledge." She heard boots on rock, the careful sound of someone approaching the edge. Then a face appeared above her, silhouetted against the bright sky. Even with the sun behind him, she could make out dark hair, a strong jaw, and eyes that widened as they found her. "Jesus Christ," the man breathed. "Are you hurt? Can you move?" "My ankle is injured," Tessa called up. "I cannot climb. The ledge is not stable." "Do not move," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. "Stay absolutely still. I am coming down to get you." "It is too dangerous," Tessa protested, even as hope surged through her chest. "The walls are too steep. You will fall." "I have been climbing these canyons since I was 10 years old," the man said, and she heard the faint trace of amusement in his voice despite the situation's gravity. "I did not survive this long just to let a lady die on my watch. Give me a minute." He disappeared from view. Tessa waited, hardly daring to breathe, listening to the sounds of him moving around above. She heard his horse snort, heard the creak of leather and the clink of metal. Then he reappeared at the edge, this time with a coiled rope in his hands. He had removed his hat, and she could see him more clearly now, a man probably in his mid-20s with sun-bronzed skin and the kind of lean, muscular build that came from hard physical labor. "I am securing the rope to my horse," he explained as he worked. "Zane will hold steady. The walls are steep, but there are enough hand and footholds if you know where to look. Just keep talking to me so I know you are all right." "I am Tessa," she said, because it seemed important somehow to have names between them. "Tessa Vaughn. My family owns the ranch 5 miles south of Douglas." "I know the place," he said as he tied off the rope and tested it with several hard yanks. "I am Zane Garrett. I have a small spread about 8 miles east of your property. Not much, just me and a few hands, but we manage." He looped the rope around his waist and over his shoulder in some complicated arrangement that looked practiced and secure. Then, before Tessa could say anything else, he swung himself over the edge and began descending the ravine wall. She watched in breathless silence as he climbed down with careful precision, testing each handhold before committing his weight, his boots finding purchase on tiny ledges she had not even noticed. Twice, rocks came loose under his hands and tumbled past her to shatter on the canyon floor below. Each time her heart stopped, but he adjusted smoothly and kept coming. Sweat gleamed on his face and darkened his shirt, and she could see the strain in his arms as he lowered himself foot by foot down the sheer rock face. When he finally reached her ledge, dropping the last few feet with a controlled movement that still made the whole thing shift alarmingly, Tessa felt tears start again. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with gray eyes that assessed her injuries with quick efficiency, and a mouth set in a grim line of concentration. "All right," he said quietly, crouching beside her on the narrow space. "Let me look at you before we try to move." "Where does it hurt worst?" "My ankle," Tessa said, her voice shaking now that help was actually here, now that she did not have to be brave alone anymore. My left ankle, and my ribs hurt when I breathe deeply. Everything else is just cuts and bruises, I think. Zane's hands were surprisingly gentle as he ran them along her arms, checking for breaks, then carefully probed her ribs through her torn shirtwaist. She hissed in pain at certain spots, but he nodded. Bruised badly, maybe cracked, but I do not think anything is broken there. The ankle, though. He carefully touched her boot and she cried out. That is probably fractured. We will have to splint it before I can get you up, but not here. This ledge is not stable enough for me to work properly. How are we going to get up? Tessa asked, looking at the sheer wall he had just descended. I cannot climb like that. You are not going to, Zane said. He was already untying the rope from around himself, shaking it out. I am going to carry you. Tessa stared at him. That is impossible. You cannot climb carrying me. We will both fall. I am not going to climb, Zane said patiently. My horse is going to pull us up. That is why I brought Zane. He is strong as an ox and steady as bedrock. I am going to secure this rope around both of us, then signal him to back up. He will do all the work. We just have to hold on and keep our feet against the wall to fend off the worst of the bumps. It sounded insane. It sounded like the kind of plan that got people killed. But Tessa looked at the setting sun, felt the throb of her ankle and the dryness of her mouth, and knew she had no choice. If she stayed here overnight without water, she would not survive. All right, she whispered. What do I need to do? Trust me, Zane said simply. He moved closer, wrapping the rope around both of them in a complex pattern that brought her tight against his chest. His hands were impersonal but warm, and she could smell sweat and leather and horse on him, familiar ranch smells that were oddly comforting. Put your arms around my neck and hold on as tight as you can. When we start moving, keep your face against my shoulder so you do not get scraped by the rock. I will handle the rest. Tessa did as he instructed, wrapping her arms around his neck. He shifted her carefully so her injured ankle was between them, protected, then lifted her with a smooth motion that made her gasp. She weighed nothing to him, apparently, despite being a healthy woman of average height. He held her with one arm while he used the other to tug on the rope in some kind of signal. Ready? He asked, his breath warm against her ear. No, Tessa admitted, but do it anyway. She felt him laugh, just a small huff of air, and then the rope went taut and they were rising. Tessa buried her face against Zane's shoulder as he had told her and held on with desperate strength. The ascent was nothing like the smooth descent she had made in falling. They scraped against the rock wall, spinning slightly, bumping hard against outcroppings. Zane used his feet to push them away from the worst obstacles, his body taking the brunt of the impacts to spare her. His muscles were iron hard under her hands, every line of him tense with effort despite the horse doing the pulling. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then suddenly, Zane was lifting her. Strong hands were grabbing her, and she was being pulled over the lip of the ravine onto blessedly flat, solid ground. She collapsed immediately, her whole body shaking with reaction. Someone covered her with a coat. Water appeared, a canteen pressed to her lips, and she drank in greedy gulps until Zane gently pulled it away. Slow, he said. Too much too fast will make you sick. Tessa nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Now that she was safe, everything hit her at once, the terror and pain and sheer, overwhelming relief. She started crying in earnest, huge gulping sobs that hurt her ribs but would not be stopped. Zane did not tell her to calm down or hush. He simply sat beside her and waited, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder in silent support, until the storm passed and she could breathe again. We need to get you to a doctor, he said when she finally quieted. Douglas has one, Dr. Morrison. He is competent enough. Can you ride if I hold you? My horse can carry double for the distance we need to go." "I think so," Tessa said hoarsely. Everything still hurt, but the water had helped, and having solid ground beneath her made the pain more bearable. "My mare ran off. She made it to the top. She will probably go home. Then your family will come looking for you," Zane said. "But that will take time we do not have. Better to get you treated now." He stood and extended a hand to her. "Come on, let me help you up." Getting onto the horse was an exercise in agony despite Zane's careful handling. Her ankle screamed every time it moved, and by the time she was settled in front of him in the saddle, she was dizzy with pain. But his arm around her waist was solid and secure, and when the horse started moving at a careful walk, she let herself lean back against his chest and focus on just breathing. The ride to Douglas took over an hour, the sun setting in brilliant streaks of orange and purple across the western sky. Zane did not try to make conversation, for which Tessa was grateful. She drifted in and out of awareness, conscious mainly of the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, the warmth of the man behind her, the slowly cooling air as night approached. Once she came fully alert to find Zane dripping water from his canteen onto his bandana and using it to gently clean the blood from her face. His touch was so careful, so tender, that fresh tears prickled her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," Zane said quietly, "but anyone did not. You did." Tessa turned her head slightly to look at him, his face softened by the twilight. "Why were you out there? That trail is not well traveled." "I was checking on some stray cattle that wandered into that area," Zane said. "Lucky timing, I suppose, or providence. Depends on what you believe." "Today I believe in providence," Tessa said softly. Douglas was a small town, barely more than a cluster of buildings around a main street, but it had the basics. A general store, a saloon, a church, and Dr. Morrison's office attached to his house. Lights glowed in windows as Zane rode down the street, drawing curious looks from the few people still out at this hour. He pulled up in front of the doctor's house and dismounted carefully, then lifted Tessa down with the same gentle strength he had shown throughout. Dr. Morrison, a graying man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, took one look at her and ushered them into his examination room immediately. He asked quick, pertinent questions as he worked, cutting away her boot to examine her ankle, cleaning and bandaging her various cuts and scrapes, wrapping her ribs tightly. Zane stayed the whole time, standing against the wall with his hat in his hands, watching with an intensity that made Tessa's skin prickle with awareness whenever she glanced his way. "The ankle is definitely broken," Dr. Morrison announced after a thorough examination. "Clean break, though, which is good. I will set it and splint it, and if you stay off it for at least 6 weeks, it should heal properly. The ribs are badly bruised but not broken. The cuts are superficial. You were very lucky, Miss Vaughn." "I know," Tessa said, looking past the doctor to where Zane stood. Their eyes met and held for a long moment before he looked away, color rising in his face. Setting the ankle was the worst part of the whole ordeal. Tessa bit down on a leather strap and gripped the sides of the examination table until her knuckles went white, but she still cried out when the doctor manipulated the bone back into place. Through the haze of pain, she felt a hand close over hers, large and calloused and warm. Zane had moved to her side without her noticing, and he held her hand while the doctor finished the job, his thumb rubbing small circles over her knuckles in wordless comfort. By the time Dr. Morrison finished splinting and wrapping the ankle, full darkness had fallen outside. Tessa sat up carefully, testing her range of movement, feeling battered and exhausted but infinitely better than she had on that ledge. "You need rest," the doctor said firmly. Proper bed rest for at least a few days, then limited movement for weeks after. Do you have someone who can care for you? My brother, Tessa said, then hesitated. But he does not know where I am. He will be worried sick by now. I will ride out to your ranch tonight and let him know you are safe, Zane offered immediately. He can come fetch you in the morning with a wagon. The ride would be too much for you right now in your condition. You have done enough, Tessa protested weakly. You must be exhausted. I am fine, Zane said, and the stubborn set of his jaw told her there was no point in arguing. You can stay here tonight. Dr. Morrison, do you have space? My wife can set up the spare room, the doctor said, already heading for the door. Martha, we have a patient staying overnight. Events moved quickly after that. Martha Morrison, a plump woman with a motherly smile, swept in and took charge of getting Tessa cleaned up properly and settled into a comfortable bed. Zane disappeared to send word to her family, and exhaustion pulled Tessa under like a dark tide before she could even properly thank him again. She woke to morning sunlight streaming through lace curtains and the smell of bacon cooking. Her body ached in approximately 1,000 places, but the desperate, frightening pain of yesterday had faded to something more manageable. She managed to sit up just as Martha bustled in with a breakfast tray. Good, you are awake, the older woman said cheerfully. Your brother arrived about 20 minutes ago. He is downstairs with Mr. Garrett. They have been discussing how best to transport you home. Mr. Garrett is still here, Tessa asked, surprised. I thought he left last night. Oh, he did, but he returned this morning to check on you, Martha said, setting the tray across Tessa's lap. Such a thoughtful young man, quite handsome too, if you do not mind me saying. Now eat up. You need your strength. Tessa picked at the food, her appetite not quite returned but managed to eat enough to satisfy Martha. Then her brother Thomas appeared in the doorway, his face drawn with worry and relief. Tessa, he breathed, crossing the room in 3 strides to pull her into a careful hug. My God, when your mare came back without you, when we found where the trail had collapsed, I thought we had lost you. I am all right, Tessa assured him, hugging back as best she could with her injuries. Thanks to Mr. Garrett. If he had not come along when he did. She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. Thomas pulled back and looked at her seriously. He told me what he did, climbing down to get you. That took courage and skill. We owe him a debt we can never properly repay. He is a good man, Tessa said softly. Yes, Thomas agreed, something thoughtful in his expression. Yes, he certainly seems to be. He is downstairs now if you would like to thank him properly before we take you home. Tessa desperately wanted to see Zane again, but she was also acutely aware of how she must look, battered and bruised and wearing a borrowed nightgown with her hair in a messy braid. Could you bring him up? Just for a moment, Thomas nodded and disappeared. Tessa heard low voices downstairs, then footsteps on the stairs. Zane appeared in the doorway, hat in hands again, looking uncertain in a way he had not when he was hauling her out of a ravine. Miss Vaughn, he said formally. I am glad to see you looking better. Thanks to you, Tessa said. Mr. Garrett, I do not know how to properly thank you for what you did. You risked your life for a stranger. It was nothing, Zane said, but color rose in his face again. It was everything, Tessa corrected quietly. I would be dead if not for you. That is not nothing. They looked at each other across the room, and Tessa felt something shift in the air between them, some current of connection that had been there yesterday on the ledge, during the ride to town, while he held her hand through the worst of the pain, but which only now crystallized into full awareness. From the way Zane's eyes widened slightly, she thought he felt it too. Thomas cleared his throat. We should let Tessa rest. We have a long ride home ahead of us, even in the wagon. Of course, Zane said quickly. I should be going anyway. I have work to attend to. Will you come visit?" The words were out of Tessa's mouth before she could think better of them. "Once I am settled at home, I would like to thank you properly when I am not looking like something dragged behind a horse." Zane's face broke into a slow smile that transformed his features and made Tessa's breath catch. "I would like that," he said simply. "I would like that very much." He left after that, and Thomas helped coordinate getting Tessa dressed in the least damaged of her clothing from yesterday, and then down the stairs to where a wagon waited, its bed lined with blankets and pillows. The ride home was uncomfortable despite everyone's best efforts, every bump and jolt sending pain through her ribs and ankle, but Tessa barely noticed. Her mind was full of gray eyes and gentle hands and the memory of a smile. The next 2 weeks passed in a slow blur of forced rest and healing. Tessa chafed at the confinement, used to being active and useful around the ranch, but Dr. Morrison's orders were strict, and Thomas enforced them ruthlessly. She spent her days in her room or on the porch, reading, doing needlework, and watching the ranch operations from a distance. The bruises faded from purple to yellow-green. The cuts scabbed over and began to heal. Her ribs stopped hurting quite so badly when she breathed, and she thought about Zane Garrett constantly. She told herself she was being ridiculous. They had spent perhaps 3 hours total in each other's company under extraordinary circumstances. She knew almost nothing about him beyond the basics. He had a small ranch, he was skilled at climbing and roping, he was brave and kind. But she could not stop thinking about the way he had looked at her in Dr. Morrison's spare room, or the care in his touch, or the sound of his rare laugh. He did not visit. As the days stretched on, Tessa began to think perhaps she had imagined the connection between them, or that he had thought better of pursuing acquaintance with a woman whose recklessness had nearly gotten her killed. The disappointment was far sharper than it should have been for someone who was essentially a stranger. Then, exactly 2 weeks after the accident, Thomas came to find her on the porch where she was attempting to read the same page of a novel for the 5th time. "You have a visitor," he said, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. "Mr. Garrett is here. Should I show him out?" Tessa's heart kicked into a gallop that had nothing to do with her injuries. "Yes, please. Yes, show him out here." Thomas gave her a knowing look but said nothing, disappearing back into the house. Tessa frantically tried to smooth her hair and her skirts, wishing she had worn something nicer than this plain day dress, wishing she had more warning, wishing her palms were not suddenly sweating. Then Zane walked onto the porch and all of her scattered thoughts focused down to a single point of awareness. He had cleaned up since she last saw him, wearing what were clearly his good clothes. Dark trousers, a pressed shirt, a string tie, boots that had been polished. His hair was neatly combed back, and he held a small bouquet of wildflowers in one hand. "Miss Vaughn," he said, executing a small, awkward bow. "I hope I am not disturbing you. I would have come sooner, but I wanted to give you time to recover, and also I was not sure. That is, I did not want to presume." "You are not presuming," Tessa said quickly, smiling at his obvious nervousness. "Please sit down. I am glad you came. I was beginning to think you had forgotten about me." "Forgotten?" Zane sat in the chair beside hers, setting his hat on the porch railing. "Miss Vaughn, I have thought about little else for 2 weeks. He stopped, color flooding his face. "That is too forward. I apologize." "Do not apologize," Tessa said softly. "I have been thinking about you too." They looked at each other, and that current flowed between them again, stronger this time. Zane seemed to remember the flowers he was holding and thrust them toward her almost clumsily. "These are for you. They are not much, just what grows wild on my property, but I thought." "They are beautiful," Tessa said, taking them carefully. "Indian paintbrush and desert marigold, bright splashes of orange and yellow. Thank you." "How are you healing?" Zane asked, leaning forward with genuine concern. "Your ankle, your ribs." "Better every day," Tessa assured him. "Dr. Morrison says the ankle is setting well. Another month before I can put weight on it, but after that I should be fine. The ribs are much improved. Everything else has healed." "That is good," Zane said. He hesitated, then added, "I have been worried about you." "Have you?" Tessa asked, daring to be bold. "Why is that, Mr. Garrett?" He met her eyes directly. "Because in the space of a few hours you became important to me. I know that sounds insane. I know we barely know each other. But when I saw you on that ledge, so brave despite being terrified and hurt, and then the way you trusted me to get you out, I have not been able to stop thinking about you." Tessa's breath caught. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "I keep telling myself I am being foolish, that we are strangers, but it does not feel that way. You do not feel like a stranger to me." "No," Zane agreed quietly. "You do not feel like a stranger to me either." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight and wonder of the confession settling between them. Then Zane cleared his throat. "Would it be acceptable if I visited you again? Regularly? I would like to know you better, Miss Vaughn, properly with your brother's permission." "I would like that very much," Tessa said, warmth spreading through her chest. "And please call me Tessa. Miss Vaughn is far too formal for the man who carried me out of a ravine." Zane's smile was like sunrise. "Tessa, and you should call me Zane." "Zane," she repeated, liking the sound of his name on her tongue. He stayed for an hour, and they talked about everything and nothing. His ranch and the struggles of building something from almost nothing, her family and the weight of expectations, books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they had never spoken aloud before. Conversation flowed easily, naturally, punctuated by laughter and moments of comfortable silence. When he finally stood to leave, promising to return in 2 days, Tessa felt both disappointed and excited, already counting the hours until she would see him again. Thomas came out after Zane rode away, settling into the chair the other man had vacated. "He seems decent," he said carefully. "Respectful, hard-working from what I have heard. His ranch is small, but he has a good reputation. Are you giving me permission to see him?" Tessa asked, raising an eyebrow at her brother. "I am saying I will not stand in your way if this is what you want," Thomas said. "After Father died, I know I have been overbearing about your future. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just trying to control things I cannot control. You are a grown woman, Tessa, smart and capable. If Zane Garrett makes you happy, then I am glad for it." Tessa reached over and squeezed her brother's hand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." Zane came back 2 days later as promised, and then 2 days after that. As the weeks passed and Tessa's ankle healed, his visits became the highlights of her existence. Sometimes they sat on the porch and talked for hours. Sometimes he pushed her wheelchair, which Dr. Morrison had loaned her, around the ranch property so she could feel less confined. Once he brought his guitar and played for her, self-conscious about his skill but beautiful nonetheless, and she sang harmony to his melody while the sunset painted the sky in impossible colors. They told each other their stories. Zane spoke of growing up on a ranch in Texas, losing his parents to cholera when he was 19, drifting west with nothing but his horse and his determination. He had worked as a ranch hand for 5 years, saving every penny until he had enough to buy his own small piece of land. It was not much, he admitted, maybe 200 acres with barely enough water and grass to support a modest herd, but it was his. He was building something that belonged to him alone, something he could be proud of. Tessa told him about growing up as the youngest of 3 children, the only girl, and how her father had alternated between treating her like a precious doll and a disappointment for not being born male. She spoke of loving the ranch work, the animals, the freedom of riding across open land, but always being told it was not proper for a lady. When her father died, she had hoped things might change, but Thomas had simply inherited their father's attitudes along with the ranch. "It is not that I do not love Thomas," she explained one afternoon as they sat by the creek that ran through her family's property. "I do. He is a good man and he means well, but he sees me as something fragile that needs protecting, not as a partner or equal." "You are not fragile," Zane said firmly. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met." "I broke my ankle falling off a horse," Tessa pointed out wryly. "The ground gave way," Zane countered. "That was not your fault." "And you survived a 30-foot fall onto a narrow ledge, then stayed conscious and coherent despite injuries and fear. Most people would have panicked themselves right over the edge. You did not. That is strength." Tessa felt heat rise in her face, pleased by his words. "You are biased." "I am honest," Zane said. He reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing over her knuckles the way he had in Dr. Morrison's office. "Tessa, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, getting to know you have been the best of my life. I come here every time telling myself I will be sensible, go slow, not rush anything. But the truth is that I am falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you on that ledge, and I have not been able to stop." Tessa's heart felt too big for her chest. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I tried to talk myself out of it. I tried to be practical. But every time you come here, every time you look at me like I matter, like I am worth listening to, I fall a little bit more." Zane lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You matter," he said against her skin, "more than you know." They kissed for the first time that afternoon, a sweet, tentative meeting of lips that sent shivers down Tessa's spine and made the world feel new and infinite with possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, Zane rested his forehead against hers and laughed quietly. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "So have I," Tessa said, smiling against his mouth. "Do it again." He did, and they stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, talking and kissing and dreaming aloud about a future together. But reality, as it always did, intruded on their happiness. Zane's ranch was struggling. A dry summer had limited the grass, and several head of cattle had wandered off or been taken by rustlers. He tried to hide his worry from Tessa, but she knew enough about ranching to read between the lines of what he told her. Money was tight. One bad winter could ruin him entirely. He was proud, though, and refused to accept help even when Tessa tentatively offered to speak with Thomas about a loan. "I will not come to you as a charity case," Zane said firmly. "I need to make this work on my own terms." "Asking for help is not charity," Tessa argued. "It is what people do for each other." "Not what a man does for the woman he loves," Zane said. "I want to offer you a real life, Tessa. A home, security, a future, not struggle and poverty." "I do not care about money," Tessa said, frustrated by his stubbornness. "I care about you. And I care about being able to provide for you properly," Zane shot back. "Do you not understand? I love you. I want to marry you. But I will not ask you to leave a comfortable home to scrape by on barely enough. You deserve better than that." "You are what I deserve," Tessa said quietly. "Everything else is just details." But Zane remained adamant, and they fought about it more than once over the following weeks. Tessa healed enough to walk with a cane, then without one, her ankle regaining strength. Fall turned to winter, and the Arizona high desert grew cold at night, frost forming on the grass by morning. Zane still visited, but she could see the strain in his face, the weight of worry he carried. She wanted to help, but every offer was refused. His pride, which she had admired, was becoming the thing that kept them apart. Then came the day when Zane did not show up for their planned meeting. Tessa waited on the porch for 2 hours, wrapped in a shawl against the December chill, before finally accepting that something was wrong. The next morning, she saddled her mare, now fully recovered from their shared ordeal, and rode to Zane's ranch despite Thomas's protests that she should not go alone. What she found made her heart sink. The ranch house was small and simple, not much more than a cabin really, with a barn and a few outbuildings in various states of repair. But it was the lack of cattle in the visible pastures that alarmed her most. Where there should have been dozens of head grazing, she saw perhaps 15 scattered animals, far too few for a working ranch. Zane came out of the barn as she approached, and the surprise and dismay on his face told her he had not wanted her to see this. "Tessa, what are you doing here?" "You did not come yesterday," she said, dismounting carefully. Her ankle was strong enough now, but she was still cautious. "I was worried." "I am sorry," Zane said, not meeting her eyes. "I should have sent word. I was dealing with some problems here." "What kind of problems?" Tessa asked, though she could already guess. Zane sighed and finally looked at her, his expression weary. "Rustlers hit me 3 nights ago. Took at least 20 head, maybe more. I rode out with my hands to track them but lost the trail in the rocks north of here. Combined with what I lost over the summer, I am down to barely enough stock to call this a functioning ranch." "Oh, Zane," Tessa breathed. "Why did you not tell me?" "Because what could you do?" he asked, not unkindly but with a frustration that bordered on defeat. "This is my problem, Tessa. My failure." "It is not a failure to be the victim of thieves," Tessa said hotly, "and I could help if you would let me. My family has connections, resources." "No," Zane said flatly. "I have told you I will not come to you as a failure begging for help. You are not a failure." Tessa's voice rose with her frustration. "You are a good man working hard against bad luck and criminals. There is no shame in that." "There is shame in not being able to provide for the woman I love," Zane said, his voice rough with emotion. "Do you not understand, Tessa? I wanted to come to you as a man who had something to offer, a future, a home, not this." He gestured around at his struggling ranch, not barely scraping by with no certainty of tomorrow. Tears burned Tessa's eyes. "I do not care about any of that. I care about you. I love you." "I love you too," Zane said, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "That is why I cannot ask you to settle for this. You deserve so much more." They stood there in the cold morning air, the distance between them feeling like miles even though it was only a few feet. Tessa wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him understand that his pride was destroying the best thing either of them had ever had. But she could see in his face that he was immovable on this point, and her heart broke. "So that is it?" she asked quietly. "You are going to let your pride destroy us?" "I am going to let you find someone who can give you the life you deserve," Zane said, each word clearly costing him. "Someone established, secure, who does not have to worry about rustlers and failed crops and whether he can afford to feed his cattle through winter." "I do not want someone else," Tessa said, tears spilling over now. "I want you." "You say that now," Zane said. "But in 5 years, when you are struggling to put food on the table, when you are watching your children go without because their father could not make his ranch work, you will feel differently." "Do not tell me how I will feel," Tessa said, anger mixing with her grief. "Do not make decisions about my future without me. That is what everyone else in my life does, and I thought you were different." That hit home. She saw Zane flinch as if struck. "Tessa." "No," she said, backing toward her horse. "You have made yourself clear. Your pride matters more than what we have together. I understand now." "That is not fair," Zane protested. "Life is not fair," Tessa shot back, mounting her mare with sharp movements. "If it were, We would not have met because I was dying on a ledge, and we would not be ending this because you are too stubborn to accept that love matters more than money." She rode away before he could respond, before her tears blinded her completely, before her heart broke any more than it already had. Behind her, she heard Zane call her name once, but she did not turn around. She could not. If she looked back, she would give in, would compromise herself further, and she had done enough of that in her life. The next weeks were misery. Tessa moved through her days like a ghost, going through the motions of living without any real engagement. Christmas came and went in a blur. Thomas tried to comfort her, but there was nothing he could say that helped. She had lost the man she loved because he loved her too much to let her struggle with him, and the tragic irony of that was almost unbearable. She did not see Zane at all during this time. She heard through ranch gossip that he had sold some of his land to cover his losses, that he was consolidating what remained, that he was working himself nearly to death trying to salvage his dream. Every report made her heart ache more, made her want to ride out to him and damn the consequences, but she forced herself to stay away. He had made his choice. She had to respect it even if she hated it. Then, in early January, Thomas came to her room one evening with an odd expression on his face. "You have a visitor," he said. "Zane Garrett is here. He is asking to speak with you." Tessa's heart leaped painfully. "I do not want to see him," she said, which was a lie. She desperately wanted to see him, but she also could not bear another rejection. "I think you should," Thomas said gently. He looks like a man at the end of his rope. I think he needs you." That decided her. Whatever else had happened between them, whatever pride or pain stood in the way, she could not ignore someone in genuine need. She followed Thomas downstairs to find Zane pacing in the parlor like a caged animal. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, his face was haggard, and his clothes hung loose on his frame. When he saw her, he stopped abruptly, his hands clenching at his sides. "Tessa," he said hoarsely. "Thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Zane?" Tessa asked, trying to keep her voice steady, trying not to show how much seeing him like this hurt. "I want to tell you I was wrong," Zane said in a rush. "About everything. I have spent the past month trying to convince myself that letting you go was the right thing, the noble thing. But all I have done is make both of us miserable. I have been so focused on being able to provide material things that I forgot the most important thing I could offer you is myself. My love, my partnership, my respect for who you are and what you want." Tessa's breath caught. "Zane, please let me finish," he interrupted. "I sold half my land. I used the money to settle my debts and secure what remains. It is not much, maybe 60 acres and a small herd. But it is paid for, it is mine, and it is enough to build on. I will never be a wealthy man, Tessa. I will probably always struggle some. But I am a good rancher and I am a hard worker, and with time I can build something we can be proud of, if you will have me. If you will marry me and build that future together." "What changed?" Tessa asked, hardly daring to hope. "Why now?" "Because I realized that pride was cold comfort when I woke up every morning missing you," Zane said simply. "Because my ranch means nothing if I cannot share it with you. Because you were right when you said I was making decisions about our future without you. You are not some delicate flower that needs protecting from reality, Tessa. You are strong and capable, and you deserve to choose your own path, even if that path is harder than I would wish for you." Tears were streaming down Tessa's face again, but this time they were different tears. "You stubborn, impossible man," she said, crossing the room to him. "Of course I will marry you. I have been waiting for you to figure this out." Zane caught her in his arms and kissed her like a drowning man finding air, desperate and relieved and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. "I love you," Zane said, cupping her face in his hands. "I am sorry I was such a fool." "I love you too," Tessa said. "And yes, you were a complete fool, but you are my fool." They were married on a cold February morning in Douglas's small church, with Thomas standing as witness and half the town in attendance because everyone loved a romance. Tessa wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers because that was how it had started between them. Zane wore his best clothes and looked at her like she was the sun, and he was finally warm after a lifetime of cold. The ranch Zane had kept was small, and the house needed work, but Tessa had never been happier. They worked side by side to improve the property, Tessa proving as capable with ranch work as she had always claimed. She had a gift with the animals, gentling even the most skittish cattle, and a head for the business side that complemented Zane's practical skills. Together they were formidable, and slowly, season by season, the ranch began to thrive. Their first year was hard. There were times when money was tight, when they had to make difficult choices about what to invest in and what to delay. But they faced every challenge together, and there was joy even in the struggle. Joy in working side by side under the Arizona sun. Joy in falling into bed exhausted at the end of long days and waking wrapped in each other's arms. Joy in building something that belonged to both of them equally. Thomas proved a generous neighbor, offering help without making it feel like charity, lending equipment, sharing knowledge. The rift between brother and sister healed as Thomas saw how happy Tessa was, how fulfilled she was by the life she had chosen. He became a regular visitor and a trusted friend to Zane, the two men developing a mutual respect that went beyond their connection through Tessa. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Tessa realized she was pregnant. The joy and terror of that realization hit her simultaneously. They were still building, still establishing themselves, still vulnerable to all the dangers that faced small ranchers. But when she told Zane, his face lit up with such pure happiness that all her fears faded. "We will manage," he said, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "We always manage," and they did. Their son was born in late November of 1886, a healthy, loud baby they named James after Zane's father. Tessa took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, though she freely admitted the sleep deprivation was harder than any ranch work. Zane was a devoted father, wrapping their son in a sling and carrying him while doing chores so Tessa could rest, singing off key lullabies in the middle of the night, staring at the baby with wonder as if he could not quite believe this miracle was theirs. The ranch continued to grow. They added land carefully, only when they could truly afford it. They built a reputation for quality stock and honest dealing. Other ranchers began to seek Zane's advice, respecting his knowledge and work ethic. Tessa became known for her skill with horses, breaking and training animals that others considered impossible. Together, they made a name for themselves in the territory, not as the largest or richest ranch, but as one of the most respected. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons. Droughts came and they endured. Good years came and they prospered. 2 years after James was born, they had a daughter, Emma, who had her mother's determination and her father's gray eyes. Then another son, Daniel, quiet and thoughtful. Their house expanded to accommodate their growing family. Rooms added one by one as they could afford them. What had started as a simple cabin became a real home, filled with laughter and love and the comfortable chaos of family life. Through it all, Tessa and Zane remained partners in every sense. They made decisions together, shared responsibilities, supported each other through difficulties. The love that had begun on a ravine ledge deepened and matured, becoming something richer than the initial fire of new passion. They knew each other's moods, could communicate with a glance, could finish each other's thoughts. They fought sometimes, because strong people with strong opinions inevitably clash, but they always reconciled, always remembered that they were on the same side. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zane took Tessa riding to the ridge where she had fallen so many years ago. The trail had been repaired and secured, made safe, but they still approached carefully. They dismounted and stood at the edge, looking down into the ravine where everything had changed. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not come along that day?" Tessa asked, leaning against her husband's side. "All the time," Zane admitted. "I think about how different my life would be, how empty. I was existing before you, Tessa, just going through the motions." "You made me live. You saved my life," Tessa said softly, "in more ways than one." "We saved each other," Zane corrected. He turned her to face him, his hands warm on her shoulders. "I love you. I have loved you for 10 years, and I will love you for 10,000 more if I am lucky enough to live that long." "I love you too," Tessa said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "My stubborn, impossible, wonderful man." They rode home as the sun set, painting the Arizona desert in shades of gold and rose, their horses walking side by side the way their lives had joined. Behind them, the ravine stood empty and quiet, just a mark on the landscape where water had carved stone. But for two people, it was the spot where everything had changed, where a fall had become a beginning, where fear had transformed into love. Years continued to pass. The children grew. James became a fine rancher like his father, eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations. Emma surprised everyone by developing a passion for medicine, traveling to California to study, the first doctor in the family. Daniel discovered a talent for law and politics, his quiet thoughtfulness serving him well in negotiation and governance. Tessa and Zane watched their children forge their own paths with pride and occasional terror, learning to let go while always remaining a source of support. They grew old together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening in their faces, their hands growing gnarled from decades of hard work. But Zane still looked at Tessa like she was 22 and miraculous, and she still felt her heart skip when he smiled. They had built a legacy together, not just in land and cattle, but in the family they had raised and the community they had served. On a warm evening in the early summer of 1914, when they were both in their 50s and surrounded by children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration, Tessa found herself on the porch of their expanded house, looking out over land they had worked and loved for 3 decades. Zane came to stand beside her, as he always did, his hand finding hers automatically. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking that if my horse had not stumbled that day, if the ground had not given way, if you had not been riding through that particular stretch of desert at that particular moment, none of this would exist," Tessa said, gesturing to the house full of laughter, the land spread out before them, the life they had built. "Everything we have, everything we are, started with a fall and a rescue." "Providence," Zane said softly, echoing what he had said so many years ago. "Or the luckiest accident in history." "Both," Tessa decided, squeezing his hand. "Definitely both." Inside, someone called for them to come cut the cake. James and his wife had brought a grandchild, their 5th, and the family wanted to celebrate together. But Tessa and Zane lingered for one more moment on the porch, holding hands the way they had held each other through 3 decades of life, looking out at the desert that had nearly claimed her and instead had given them everything. "I would do it all again," Tessa said quietly. "Every hard moment, every struggle, every fear, all of it exactly the same to end up right here with you." "Me too," Zane said, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture as familiar as breathing. Every single moment. They went inside together, stepping into the warmth and noise of family, their hands still joined. Outside, the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in colors that would have been impossible to imagine, but were absolutely real. The way their love had been impossible to imagine, but had become the most real thing in both their lives. The ravine where it all began stood silent in the distance, a quiet witness to the truth that sometimes the worst moments become the doorway to the best life, and that falling can be the first step toward flying as long as someone is there to catch you. And Zane had caught her, that day and every day since, the way she had caught him right back. Two souls finding each other in the vastness of the Wild West, and holding on through everything life could throw at them. Their love the constant in a changing world. Their partnership the foundation of a legacy that would endure long after they were gone.